Could there be a feminist way of writing about the city? What would it mean in terms of form? Whose voices would be foregrounded? What implication would it have on the process? This panel answers some of these questions through a moderated conversation between writers and creators, occupying and transforming their respective locations. They have varied relationships, sometimes intimate, sometimes fraught, with the places and spaces they inhabit. Their experience promises to offer a new lens for us to look at our own surroundings. Please note the session will be conducted in both Hindi and English. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Abhishek Anicca is a writer, poet, performer, and activist. He identifies as a person with locomotor disability and chronic illness, which shapes his creative endeavors. He edits Dislang, the magazine, and his first book, tentatively titled The Body Comes First, is scheduled for release in late 2023. Vikas Khatri belongs to Falodi, Jodhpur in Rajasthan. Associated with the Third Eye as a digital educator, Vikas is honing his understanding of and skills in story writing, videography, photography, and audio production. Vijeta Kumar teaches communicative English at St. Joseph's University, Bengaluru. She has written for Deccan Herald, First Post, The Third Eye, HuffPost, India Today, and the Funambulist magazine, and writes more regularly at rumlolarum.com. Our moderator, Sonia Harshi, is a feminist researcher and aspiring educator. She leads the communication strategy work at Nirantar and The Third Eye in New Delhi. She has been a part of the founding team of Economic and Political Weekly's digital initiative, Engage. So over to you, Sonia. Thanks.
Am I audible? Yeah? Is this good? Okay. Thanks, Lubna, and so glad to be, in conversation with Vikas, Vijeta, and Abhishek as part of this panel. They're writers and they're friends of The Third Eye, where they've all contributed works as well. And I think somehow the idea for this conversation stemmed from The Third Eye City Edition, which asked a question about, thinking about cities. And when we talk about the city, what is it that we actually talk about? Is it the city itself, which is a subject of a lot of discussion around urban studies? Or is it about aspirations, desires, ways of locating oneself in the city, and about placemaking? In this conversation, to kick it off in some ways, I would like to ask all of our speakers here who are very much invested and located in their respective locations to start by telling us, when I say city, what is it that you think of? It could be anything. As simple as a place name. But what is it that you think of? What is it that drives you when I say city?
A city is a space where there's a constant tussle going on between belonging and unbelonging. You're constantly struggling to feel as if you belong, and yet there's a complicated relationship where you are constantly seeking acceptance, and yet you observe ways in which you are being denied. For me personally, my disability and chronic illness shapes my idea of the city in different ways. When I'm in Darbhanga, where I grew up, when I went back after COVID, which I wrote about which I wrote in The Third Eye, the thing is, it's a small city where if I got out on the streets and just walked, people would stare at you or make fun of you, of your disability, of your fatness, of whatever, of your body. So, and the roads are inaccessible, of course, and you can't go out. But it's the internal fear which defines the city for you. The idea that if you went out, what would happen there? When I was living in Delhi, it was the society around you. When you stepped out, children would mock your walk. Very simple thing, but which happens with disabled people every day. Or I was ill and I was crawling down the stairs and no one came for help. They all got out of their doors, but no one came for help. So that's how it defines the social perception around a person with disability and illness, especially in the COVID era. Especially in the COVID era, actually. Or even the uh, very pensive, a very non-dramatic thing, like a city like Bangalore, and you imagine it to have so many places which are attractive, and So yesterday I went to a bookstore, which is a very famous bookstore, and so friends had suggested you go there, and I realized there was stairs there. There were stairs which were difficult to climb, and the place had no chairs, so I couldn't sit there. So where does it put me? So people, when you come to Bangalore, people will say, oh, there are so many bookstores there. And as a writer, I was like, it's so many bookstores there. But if all the bookstores are inaccessible, then where will I go? Earlier also, there were some bookstores I visited and there were stairs there. So the idea of your city, whether you belong to a city, how you perceive a city and how the city perceives you is a constantly evolving thing. And of course, disability shapes it in myriad ways. And not everything is bad, but because the systemic injustice ingrained in the system against ableism, it's such that the ableistic mindset is such that you constantly feel like, do I belong here? And that's the question I often ask when it comes to the idea of the city.
हेलो तो मेरे ख्याल से सिटी अगर मैं अपने पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से बताना चाहूँगा तो सिटी एक तरह से अपॉर्चुनिटी जो होती है वो उसके लिए है कि आप सिटी को किस तरह से देख रहे हो. अगर मैं अपने पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से देखता हूँ तो मैं एक छोटे शहर से आ रहा हूँ और मैं उस सिटी को मेरे लिए जॉब एस्पिरेशन सेक्युलरिटी के लिए कोई भी और कुछ बड़ी मतलब आकांक्षा जो मेरी होती है मैं उसके देखता हूँ सिटी को. और छोटे शहर में जो चीज़ें मैं नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ वो चीज़ें मैं शहर आके कर सकता हूँ. जो चीज़ें मुझे शहर करने से रोकता है छोटा शहर, वो मुझे एक सिटी में आके मैं वो सब चीज़ें कर पाता हूँ. तो मेरे लिए अगर सिटी की बात होती है कि मैंने किसी अगर एक लड़की को किसी को देख लिया है और मैं उससे बात करने की कोशिश करता हूँ तो एक तरह से मेरी सिटी में मुझे एक डर लगता है कि मैं उस लड़की से बात कर रहा हूँ, किसी ने मुझे देख लिया तो मुझे क्या कहेंगे लोग. जब मैं एक बड़े शहर में जाता हूँ तो मुझे कोई जानता नहीं और एक ओपन स्पेस है पूरा, तो मैं किसी से भी बात कर लूँ तो वो एक तरह से वो कल्चर में है उस शहर के, लेकिन उस छोटे शहर में नहीं हो पाता है. तो मेरे लिए सिटी एक तरह से ओपन पूरा है रहता है.
Okay, now? Okay. I grew up in small parts of Karnataka, Belgaum, Bidar, Hubli, and my father was in the government service, so we kept getting moved around. The first time he visited Bangalore, he fell in love with the city because there were lots of Chinese restaurants. And when he brought us to Bangalore, the first place he made us go to was this Chungwa in MG Road somewhere. And then he said, this is why I've brought you to Bangalore. You have to taste the Chinese food here. It's the best. And every time he went there, he would have the same order. He would have a glass of Coke and chicken fried rice and some Manchurian type thing and chicken clear soup. And this became the staple order for all of us also. I've been living in Bangalore for over 20 years now, and we don't go to Chungwa as often because now many places have come, etc., etc. But I'm very interested in knowing what brought him to Bangalore, apart from the government obligation, yes, but also this idea that in a big city, no one will be as worried to find out whether you're good enough to go to this school or what your surname is or what you eat. And so I think that provided him with some sense of space in which to be invisible. It's quite opposite to the things that I've heard often about the city, that people come here to make themselves big and naam kamana and things like that. That he came here to feel smaller, to feel lost, and to make sure that nobody sees him. That idea was interesting. But because my parents raised me in Bangalore, I discovered much of the city actually after having lied to them about where I was half the time. Because you had to go to college and come back home immediately. And I would say, no, we have extra classes, we have projects, we have this, we have that. And I would run away with my boyfriend on his bike. And everything I've seen of the city when I was 16, 17 was from the back of his bike. So I would get some 50 rupees for his fuel purposes, and then we'd just go traveling around God knows where. So we went up and down Nandi Hills for no good reason except to just go there, touch Nandi Hills and come back. We wouldn't even go all the way up. But it did give me a sense of seeing the city for the first time in a way that I wasn't able to earlier. So I think for me, love and friendship have been in many ways the ways in which I discover more about the city. I was trying to read a story about what the city does to women and female friendships and love. And I'm sure there are many, many, many stories, but I wasn't quite finding the story that I wanted to read. So I ended up writing one, and it was written in a very... I was basically listening to some song in the morning, and I thought, why haven't I seen two girls on a bike just checking people out and laughing and just going from theatre to Cubbon Park to here to there? So I started writing it, and in the process of writing it, I realized that this is all I want. I don't actually even need the intimacy of female friendship. Just in the imagination of two lives and two female lives and what they do in the city, somehow gave me some sense of fulfillment. The loves and friendships don't necessarily have to fare well. Sometimes the bitter experiences have taught me that I don't really like the city very much. There are some parts of the city I like to avoid. But the quintessential Bangalore smell, you know what I'm talking about? The agarbatti mixed with cow dung smell. That's the most Bangalore smell for me. So every time I smell it, I get a whiff of all the failed friendships and romance of the past. And I'm very grateful that sometimes I'm very detached, or not detached, I'm just, after having spent 10 years not knowing where I am, who I am, how to reach the city, etc. After I got my own two-wheeler and started riding around, even though I use that two-wheeler only to get to college and to work and home, nothing else. I do nothing else with the two-wheeler. But it still gives me a lot of freedom. So I park at a traffic signal. In any signal at Bangalore, there's always something happening. Between people in other vehicles, or between a cop, strange things like that. Some 2 months ago, I parked at the JC Road signal, and a guy and his friend were on the bike, and he wasn't wearing a helmet, the pillion rider. So he quickly got off because he saw the cop ahead, and he said, okay, I'll pick you up from there. And then he went, he stopped, and he made sure that the friend had crossed the road, and then they jumped on the bike, and then they ran away. And by this time, the cop had seen them. And I think he had alerted the cop at the next signal. So at the next signal, he's caught him. So I somehow caught this out of an accident. I mean, I keep thinking if I wasn't witness to things like this, I would have missed out on such a big chunk of what's happening in the city. But staying alive to what happens in and around me at signals has been a great way for me to discover the city. I'm sure I haven't answered your question, but I think this will be my initial experience of the city.
I sort of relate to the three of your experiences. I grew up in a small town in central India, and a lot of my childhood was spent, either like learning to first ride a Luna, then graduate to, better two-wheelers. And I think the seeing of the city and how much you want to be seen is something like when I think about myself and the city and, this act of seeing, the two-wheeler is like, the small town woman's best friend. And I think this sort of nostalgia, or I've lived in bigger cities and metropolitans subsequently, and somehow for the place I grew up in, or the imagination of that city is very much on that two-wheeler, like you said, from like being a pillion rider. So I think I want to ask you all a little more about this feeling of love. And विकास, हम आपसे करेंगे कि आपने अपने एक यूथ के हॉस्टल लाइफ के बारे में काफ़ी लिखा है. तो आपके लिए वो एक मोमेंट प्यार का या एक इमोशन प्यार का, डिज़ायर का क्या रहा है अपने शहर को लेके?
एक्चुअली क्या था कि मेरा एक छोटा शहर था, तो उसमें मैं एक मतलब सबसे गुड बॉय, कहते हैं ना, गुड बॉय लाइफ था कि स्कूल में भी अच्छा, घर में भी अच्छा, सबकी जगह अच्छा. वह एक सबकी माइंड में यही था कि ये लड़का बहुत अच्छा है, इसके मैं कुछ भी कर नहीं सकता. लेकिन एक होता है कि दिमाग में आ जाता है कि जब मैं मेरे शहर से एक जोधपुर एक शहर है, मैं हॉस्टल में रहने के लिए गया था. तो मैं एक कोर्स कर रहा था, उसमें एक लड़की दिखी, तो उस लड़की के साथ अट्रैक्शन जो हुआ, फिर मैंने बात करना शुरू किया, फिर एक तरह से बातचीत हुई, व्हाट्सएप हुआ. फिर मैं जब मिला उस लड़की से, तो ठीक है, मिल गया, ठीक है, एक बात वो बनता गया कि हाँ मैं इससे बात करूँ. लेकिन जब मिला तो एक मैं थोड़ा लास्ट का थोड़ा सा बताऊंगा कि मैं उसके लिए चॉकलेट लेके गया. लड़की, मैंने पहले कभी लड़की से कभी मिला ही नहीं था किसी लड़की से. अब मुझे पता नहीं है कि उसके लिए गिफ्ट क्या ले जाना लड़की के लिए. तो मैंने दुकानदार से पूछा कि वो गिफ्ट शॉप में गया, मुझे समझ नहीं आया कि लेना क्या है. तो मैंने कहा कि एक चॉकलेट शॉप पे गया, एक चॉकलेट ले ली और सीधा उसके पास पहुंचा. तो वो क्या था, मास्क फेस कवर करके खड़ी थी वहाँ पर. तो जैसे ही मैं उससे मिला कि वो पूछा कि हाँ ये किसके लिए चॉकलेट, मैंने कहा आपके लिए, थोड़ा सा रोमांटिक होके बोला. तो जस्ट बोला ही था और पीछे मैंने देखा कि मेरे जीजा जी वहाँ पीछे खड़े हैं. तो मैंने कहा कि मुझे पूछा कि विकास यहाँ क्या कर रहा है. मैंने कहा मैंने कुछ नहीं, फ्रेंड था, फ्रेंड को नोटबुक लेने आया था. तो इतना बोल के मैं उसको जल्दी लड़की को उठा के गाड़ी पे बैठा के उसको घर छोड़ के फिर सीधा हॉस्टल आ गया. फिर एक दो दिन मैंने बात की, फिर एकदम से बंद कर दी बात. कि एक जो डर था वो पता नहीं मुझ में डर आने लग गया कि जिया जी ने अगर बात की है, किसी को बता दिया, जो मेरी वो छवि थी अच्छे लड़के की वो टूट जाएगी पूरी. कि ये ऐसा कैसे कर रहा है, इसको तो एक बहुत अच्छा लड़का है, ये कैसे मतलब ऐसे काम कर सकता है. वो जो अपने शहर में नहीं हो सकता क्योंकि अरेंज मैरिज चलता है कि हाँ अरेंज मैरिज है. लेकिन वो ऐसे कैसे लड़की के साथ घूम रहा है एक शहर में. तो जो डर था वो लव का, मैं अपने शहर में वो लव वाले जो चीज़ है वो नहीं कर पा रहा था. कि मैं बस हाँ, और करना भी चाहूँ तो वो पीछे से जो मेरी वो सीख बनी हुई या एक मेरी छवि जो बनी हुई लोगों की, वो कहीं ना कहीं टूट जाती. और मैं बड़े शहर में भी मतलब मैंने कोशिश की थी कि मैं तोड़ूं, लेकिन पता नहीं पीछे से वो जो जेजी वाला केस हुआ और फिर रील घूमती चली गई दिमाग में. तो ये केस रहा था.
अभिषेक, आपने एक इनिशियली जो बात कही वो एक काफ़ी सीरियस नोट पे भी शुरुआत हुई, बिकॉज ये वो आपका एक लिव्ड अनुभव भी है. पर जब आप प्यार या डिज़ायर के बारे में सोचते हो शहरों को लेके या स्थानों को लेके, तब आपको क्या आता है मन में?
The first thing which comes to mind is more choices on Hinge, Tinder, Bumble. Very important. Communication becomes much more easier. I can send them my articles to read before we move in the process of dating. Since I write on personal things, I write about all of these things. So it's very awkward. It gets very awkward, you know. Kya ho gaya aapko? You know, that's the first question. What happened to you? And it's like a lot of things happened to me. I am 36 now. I think I deserve much more credit than what happened to me. And it's often a complicated conversation because it's like, हाँ क्या अच्छा क्या problem क्या है वो. There was a Hindi film in which Hrithik Roshan was there, and मैं प्रेम की दीवानी हूँ, and in which the heroine's mother kept asking कि did you had sex with him? तो no, तो फिर problem क्या है? So and that is always the question कि problem क्या है? And it's always it's also like there's also a very big discourse ka difference, because in big cities you always have people who are like at least pretending to be woke. So they are like, I had a friend who was disabled and I knew this. So it's generally ठीक है, चलो, you can talk to them. If not, you can shame them later. Uh, but they will ghost you eventually when they find out like about disability. So it's a common experience which I talk about often. But personally, I'm like, it's fine. Matlab, the cities where I found love as an able-bodied person are not very different from cities where I am not able to find as love as a disabled person. It's just that your own individual experiences become very different, how you are perceived. Otherwise, Bombay में Marine Drive में you can go to Marine Drive and sit with anyone, you know. And but in a smaller town like विकास ने कहा जैसा कि अगर आप छोटे शहर में किसी लड़की के साथ दिख गए तो 5 लोग आ जाएंगे. छोटे शहर क्या, when I used to live in Delhi University hostel, I was sitting with a friend in some coffee shop, and 5 hostlers were crossing the street, and they came in, sat in a corner, and kept giving me missed calls. So, because that's what men do. Men can't come up to you and talk to. So, and this was my first year in college. I was also like, why are they doing this? And so my friend, who was like much more, she knew how to handle people like that. So she went to them and said, "Idhar hi aake baith jaiye. Why are you giving missed calls?" And all of them ran away. So this is because they're also all small towners. So that reflection of how you talk to a woman, like if you grew up in a small town, तुम किसी लड़की से स्कूल में बात नहीं करते थे. I grew up in a co-ed school which was like very broad-minded in some sense, but no one talked to women if either someone is your sister or girlfriend. That is the binary that India works with, you know. So either you are tying rakhis or you are, and everything is defined, you know, in that sense. And it is so funny because a lot of Rakhi sisters and brothers went on to marry each other in my school. And it's not even kidding, like 3 or 4 of them got married. And it's like, kyun bhai, kya matlab? So I call it constipated sexuality, you know. The sexuality in small towns is constipated. And in the bigger cities, it's like much more open. You can talk about, you know, weird stuff also. You can talk about someone I met was on FetLife, and I was talking to them about FetLife. And so, you know, you felt that there is a bigger world out there. There is some hope that even if you are considered a creep, there might be places where creepiness is okay. But in smaller towns, it has no scope. It's a very normative thing, you know. Like Vijeta's parents, you know, there is instant identification. ये इनका बेटा है, ये इनकी बेटी है, इसका caste ये है, इसका gender ये है. So any diversion from normativity to say that, okay, I do this. And with disability, it's like, बेचारा. And it's not बेचारा me, it's बेचारा my parents. कि बेचारा के बच्चे disabled हैं, बेचारा का बच्चा disabled है. So it's a very, that's where it gets complicated. But love, it's like, I feel much more liberated in bigger cities. Definitely.
मुझे एक थोड़ा discomfort है, which is, you know, also of this binary जो हम बना देते हैं ना, कि एक हम शहरों को aspiration के location की तरह देखते हैं कि कुछ अगर होता है तो शहर में होता है, whatever happens or whatever we seek is in the city. Whatever is the lack, we often see it in the grassroots, in the rural, in the peri-urban. And we often don't, I mean, we make that distinction very clearly that, you know, this is the urban, this is the rural, this is the city, this is, you know, the small town. I mean, I think I am also guilty of it on multiple occasions. But Vijaya, where, I mean, since you also teach in a classroom which sees people come from, you know, all sorts of locations in this urban-rural continuum, how do you see this understanding play out?
I didn't notice the classroom until 5 years after I started teaching. Uh, it took a while. And there was always this very interesting thing that would happen if in case I was found with a friend or a lover type person outside the classroom, like in a theater or a park, and if by mistake a student saw me, they would look away and I would look away, and then there would be some tense thing happening. But next day in the classroom, it would be as if they were my friends and they would behave like that. Like they wouldn't say anything, but it was all very visible on their faces that, I saw you yesterday, you are also human like us, only you have your things, blah, blah, blah. But it was very visible in their body language. Some sense of freedom had opened up in the way they could talk to me. But I think work kept me busy, so I stopped having these love type, friendship type things outside. Because also the other thing that happened was I started finding students in the classroom who were falling in love with each other, which is always a big delight for me. It's like big goss for me. Even when I'm teaching, sometimes I can tell who is fought with whom or who is not talking to whom anymore. And it's visible in their writing also, because they'll end up writing invariably about each other, and then I have to sit and make permutation combination map in my head. So I'm more aware about their friendships and breakups than even some of them are. And I love this, actually for my favorite part of teaching. It's not even the salary or the thing of being a teacher, but it's that it keeps you on your toes in one very auntie kind of way. So I feel like a big aunt in the classroom, because I can't say anything, because I can't even give them the relief that I know this much about them. I can't show them that I know this much about them. But for me, the classroom then becomes a place of accessing a time and an energy that I didn't have when I was younger. There are girls in the classroom who demonstrate like extreme form of self-respect sometimes. And when I see it, I'm both very scared of them, and I'm also feeling very jealous half the time, because why couldn't I say that in my youth? Where was this fire in my youth? So I keep comparing, and there's that also. But the biggest thing that happens to me when I'm a teacher in the classroom is that I feel insanely jealous of all the young women. They are in a much better sense of, they have a much better sense of who they are. They can say no when they want, some of them. And when I see it, I feel very shaken. There's that. And then there's also the smaller gestures of friendship they do for one another. So for me, the classroom itself becomes the city, because sometimes they spend more time with each other in the classroom than outside. And they take some liberties with each other and with me and with the space itself that they can't take outside the city. Because outside the classroom, there'll be security guards. And outside the gates, there'll be cops. And outside those gates will be other kinds of gates or other kinds of security or other kinds of cops. So maybe they feel more watched outside than inside. So they let themselves go a lot more easily in the classroom. Even when it comes to holding hands or looking at each other slyly, or I'll be reading some poem and some line will remind them of something, so they sit and look at each other and smile. These are all very affirming also, because I think much of my teaching energy comes from watching them do things with the things I take to the classroom. I have very little to say about a poem I take to class, because I'm more interested in seeing their faces, because they'll pick up something and they'll make 10,000 things out of it, and that's always fun to watch. So I think a big chunk of what I didn't have in my youth, which was a strong sense of friendship that is found in the city, I now get to see it in the classroom. Even though I'm not a participant in this friendship, I'm a spectator. And I think it's the best position, because I don't have to deal with the losses or the breakups or whatever, but I get to watch it when it happens. So I'm like a fly on the wall here, just taking everybody's lives and relationships and loves to big extent in my head and imagining my own things.
Do you think that also somewhat shows up in the way you write or what you write about?
No, I don't think I would write if I wasn't teaching. Much of what I write is because I teach. Also, the other thing is, writing and teaching are both very irritating. Writing is sometimes a bitch. So I have a very complicated relationship with it. But teaching is not so much, because there I am the bitch. So it's super fun for me. Much of the energy for writing comes from what I teach in class, or what I don't teach in class. It comes from watching students. They're always up to doing some nonsense or the other. For instance, they go to any lengths to protect each other in case they see a threat coming their way. So in class one day I was a little irritated because no one had come prepared with something. So I made them all get up and answer one question that I had for them. So 2 girls sitting in the front, it was clear that one of the girls hadn't read the text and the other girl had. And I don't even think she had read the text, but she was so full of energy to protect her friend that it was not even her chance to speak. But before her friend could get the chance to speak, she stood up and she started talking some nonsense, which was not even related to what I was asking. And then in the hope to distract me or something. And this girl is just sitting here and smiling and nodding and saying, "Ha, that's correct, that's correct." And so what happened in this moment was I saw exactly what was happening, and I was just very charmed by what they did for each other, so I just forgot that I'm supposed to be upset. And yeah.
विकास, विजेता और अभिषेक एक तरह के संदर्भ से आते हैं जहाँ लिखना बहुत ही उनके ऑक्यूपेशन के साथ या उनके काम के साथ जुड़ा हुआ है. जैसे विजेता ने कहा कि वो पढ़ाती हैं तो लिखती हैं, और वैसे आपके लिए ये, क्योंकि मैं जहाँ आप काम करते हैं मैं उनके साथ भी जुड़ी हुई हूँ, तो मुझे पता है कि आप लेखक के तौर पे उस काम में नहीं आए थे. एंड करीब 2 साल पहले तक विकास ये भी कहते थे कि मैं तो एक शब्द नहीं लिख सकता. तो वो सफ़र आपके लिए कैसा रहा है लिखने का, और एक प्रेरणा या एक जो प्रॉम्प्ट होता है लिखने का, वो आपको कहाँ से मिला?
सही कहा आपने कि 2 साल पहले की बात करें, जब मैं थर्ड आई से जुड़ा भी नहीं था, तो ये सब एक तरह से कहते हैं ना कि एक मनोरंजन का, एंटरटेनमेंट के लिए फिल्म्स वगैरह सब एक तरह से रील को तो उड़ा दिया, बस हो गया. मैंने एक एक्सपीरियंस शेयर किया था कि मैं अपने हॉस्टल के बारे में, कि मैं 2015 से 2017 तक हॉस्टल में रहा था एक, तो उसमें कुछ एक्सपीरियंस था. तो मुझे कहा था, कहता कि आप हॉस्टल के बारे में लिखिए. अब मन में तो बहुत था कि गिल्ट आ रहा था कि हाँ मैं लिख सकता हूँ, कि वो एक यादें भी थी, लेकिन उसको लिखना कैसे है, उनको शब्दों में कैसे उतारना, वो पता ही नहीं चल पा रहा था कि कैसे लिखें. थर्ड आई के साथ में हमारी प्रोसेस चलती गई धीरे धीरे. हमने काफ़ी फिल्म्स देखी, ऑडियो सुने, कहानियाँ देखी लोगों की. तो लास्ट 2 साल बाद हमें एक कहानी बताई गई थी कि मधुमालती अपूर्वा सैनी की है, जिसमें क्या था कि उसको शॉर्ट फॉर्म में लिखा हुआ था, लघु कथाओं के रूप में. तो वो कहानी मैंने सुनी. उसके बाद मैंने शंकर की कहानियाँ पढ़ी, और जो पॉडकास्ट हैं जैसे पॉडकास्ट वगैरह सुने. तो उसके बाद मुझे हिंट मिला कि हर चीज़, हर जगह से मैंने कुछ चीज़ें निकालनी शुरू की. जैसे जो शंकर हैं, वो क्या करते हैं कि मतलब एक कहानी में चलते चलते फ्लैशबैक में जाके वापस पीछे आ जाते हैं. तो वो मैंने उनका पकड़ लिया कि हाँ मुझे ये पसंद आ गया. तो एक मधुमालती जो अपूर्वा सैनी लिखती हैं, वो फॉर्म जो उनकी है वो लॉन्ग फॉर्म में नहीं लिख रहे हैं, शॉर्ट फॉर्म में, लघु कथाओं में लिख रहे हैं. तो मैंने भी सोचा कि मैं भी कुछ मुझे रीड करने के लिए भेजते थे, तो बहुत मतलब लंबा भेज रहे. मैं कौन पढ़े यार इतना सारा लंबा, अब छोटा सा कोई हो तो पढ़ के निकल जा रहे हैं. तो जो शॉर्ट फॉर्म है वो मैंने चूज़ किया वहाँ से. उसके बाद एक था नीलेश मिश्रा नाम से हैं, जो पॉडकास्ट करते हैं, वो ह्यूमर के साथ में किसी बात को रखते हैं. तो वो पकड़ कर फिर मैंने लिखना स्टार्ट किया. एक दिन मैं बैठा अपनी कंप्यूटर पे और मैंने लिखना शुरू किया. तो अपने आप माइंड जो था वो चलने लगा एकदम, कि मैंने चलते चलते 20 पेजेस लिख दिए. और 20 पेजेस में वो सारी 10 लघु कथाएँ थी, जिसमें हॉस्टल के सारे किस्से थे एक तरह से, कि जिसमें प्रॉम्प्ट की बात की. तो अब मैं जब लिखता हूँ किसी चीज़ को, तो जैसे मुझे शहर के बारे में लिखना है, मेरा शहर एक राजस्थान में छोटा सा शहर है फलोदी, जो बेसिकली नोन फॉर सट्टे के लिए मतलब खेलते हैं, गैम्बलिंग के लिए, जहाँ बहुत ज़्यादा सट्टा होता है। तो उसको रिप्रेजेंट करने के लिए किस तरह से फॉर्म कोई है नहीं। तो अब थर्ड आई से जो मुझे मिली चीज़ वो वाली है कि जो मैं अपनी वो बात को एक्सप्रेस नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ किसी चीज़ में कहीं पर, तो मुझे वो जो मैं राइटिंग कर रहा हूँ उससे मैं एक्सप्रेस कर पा रहा हूँ। या फिर मुझे अपने किसी इमोशन को किसी में बताना है कि मैं क्या मेरे क्या थे, कि जैसे मैं हॉस्टल में था, एक बड़े शहर में था, तो जो लड़का होना है कि एक मैं लड़का हूँ, तो लड़का होना मतलब कितना, एक बोलते हैं कि लड़कियों को ही सब कुछ स्ट्रगल करना पड़ता है, लड़कों को इतना स्ट्रगल नहीं करना पड़ता है। लेकिन जो वो लड़के को स्ट्रगल करने की बात है, लड़के पे जो जिम्मेदारी आती है, जो लड़के को कुछ सहना पड़ता है, जब लड़का एक एज में आ जाता है वो घर पे बैठ जाता है, और जो घर वाले उससे ताने मारते हैं, वो मेंटल हरेसमेंट जो वो लड़के का होता है, वो कौन बता रहा है? कोई नहीं बता पा रहा है कि लड़के के साथ क्या हो रहा है। तो मैंने ये जो राइटिंग का प्रोसेस है वो अप्लाई किया वहाँ पर, और उसे मैंने एक्सप्रेस करने की कोशिश की थी। तो मेरे लिए लेखन जो है वो एक तरह से कहते हैं मेरे इमोशन के साथ जुड़ गया। अब मैं जब भी लिखता हूँ तो मैं पूरा एकदम सोच के बैठ के लिखता हूँ कि हाँ मैं इस चीज़ को किस तरह से रिलेट कर सकता हूँ एक अपने उससे। तो मुझे आज भी याद है कि मैं जब लिख रहा था तो हॉस्टल में था, तो एक जॉब भी साथ में कर रहा था, तो मेरे पास मतलब फैमिली कंडीशन इतनी अच्छी नहीं थी, तो मैं हॉस्टल से सब छोड़ के और घर चला गया। तो मैं अराउंड 3 मंथ मतलब घर पे था। तो हर तीसरा दिन चौथा दिन मुझे लगता था घर से कि मैं कहीं भाग जाऊं कहीं पर, क्योंकि मुझे लगता था कि वो घर वालों के जो ताने हैं कि घर पे बैठा है, क्या कर रहा है यहाँ, तुझे क्या करना है, मतलब इतना बड़ा हो गया है, अब जा बाहर, क्या करना है, वो जो चीज़ थी उसे एक्सप्रेस करने के लिए मुझे एक तरह से लेखन मेरे लिए बहुत सपोर्टिव रहा है।
How did you arrive at writing?
I don't write, I vomit words. Literally, I vomit it. Like, it's like I'm too full always. And I write like if someone cheats with me, some friend betrays me, they will find me in my poem. If someone ghosts me, they will find me in my poem. So it's very easy actually. So if I block someone, they can have a fake account and just stalk me. I will definitely write a poem about them. It comes to there has to be some catharsis, idea of catharsis. It gives me immense relief. It's related to my emotions, of course. Writing personal essays is always a very, it's like walking on because you are also going deep into past. And sometimes nostalgia is very pretty, like, especially for me, like there is an able-bodied past where I used to play hopscotch. But there is also a past where I was abused by someone. Or where there is also a past where I was emotionally complicated because I had a difficult relationship with people around me. I did compulsive eating. I wrote a poem about that, samosas. It's a poem about how I was depressed all the time because I couldn't figure out myself during my teenage, and all I did was eat samosas because that was my only way. So to write about it and to now is always a challenge of sorts, but it is the best way to get over it. Therapy is very expensive, and writing is free for me. Like once you vomit words, writing is free. And you don't need validation. After a point of time, you don't even need validation. You just write for yourself. You write and just put it out. You put it out because like you want to share it with someone, And that someone is not one person, it's someone. And that is how I started writing, and that is how I still write. I write a lot, and not all of it is good because it doesn't matter. I'm not always writing as a writer. I'm writing as a human being. I'm writing as a human being who wants something to hold on to as he goes through his daily life. And writing is the most reliable thing for me. Because otherwise people if I go and unload myself on people, friends or whoever they are, they will say ki, why me? Like I tell them, like whenever people come and they have like proper able-bodied lives, heteronormative lives, proper married and all, but they want to come and unload. I don't tell them, but if they come to me every day and unload, I will say, why that? With me, like my opening statement, so it becomes like some kind of a tragic story you are constantly telling, but it's not tragic actually. The idea of saying all that is that you are not only speaking for yourself. A lot of that moves me to write about things also. At a greater level, when I write, I know, why would I write an op-ed where I talk about that I wear a diaper? It makes no sense because it worsens my chance to find a date on Tinder. But I write it because there are lots of people, men, women, whom I come across who have to wear a diaper. There's no choice there. But no one will talk about it. I have had intimate conversations with women I don't know about how they use a wheelchair or they have locomotor disability and they have to wear a diaper. And I'm giving them tips on which brand to buy and which size to buy. But that conversation is not going out of there. So somewhere the only way I can do that without compensating on our trust is by putting myself out there. So a lot of my writing which I put out there is especially about that. And the rest is for my therapy, basically. I don't want to spend money on expensive therapists. It's anyways complicated because like if I go to a doctor and if I start telling them my story, they will say, dude, it's so complicated. Like it's really that. They are also like that. And it's the same with the therapist. And that some therapists will say, okay, you should cut off all connection. Like everyone is like posturing, because they think that they get your lived experience, but they don't. And that's why it's always complicated. And the best way you can get over it is to write about it. Because I think words have that power. I think it gets out somehow. It gets better. Because the next time you write about it, you will find humor in it. You will find things, anecdotes in it. You find nostalgia where it was, you had friends. The first time you write about friends who have died. The first time you write about lying in a hospital bed in COVID and people dying. And you were writing a poem when your friends were dying. But the second time you revisit it, you look at the irony of it, that here you were dying and people were not able to reach you out, but what you were doing, you were writing a poem about how the nurse wasn't able to find your veins. So that is very cathartic for me. I think that heals a lot because there's no easier way to deal with it other than facing it and talking about it, writing about it, and putting it out.
You mentioned that, had you not been in teaching, you wouldn't have been writing. What is it about teaching that makes you so sure of writing about it? And are there moments where you feel uncertain?
The first few years of writing made me very naked because every time I started writing on my blog and made it very public because I think I was learning how to write and that was why I started this blog. It made me very naked in the classroom because there were better writers sitting in the classroom. And I think that taught me something. It taught me to be less afraid because, see, even to enter academia, someone who looks like me and someone who talks like me has to sort of learn how to ignore what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and then continue teaching. I didn't know many other Dalit people in academia when I started teaching. So it was I had to constantly reassess why I was in the classroom in the first place. When there were students who were probably rightly asking the question, I've paid 1 lakh or how much ever to be here, what am I getting from this woman? She's not teaching me anything. So at one level, it was a way of making myself better for this student who I'm not bothered about now, but I would have been a decade ago. I was very threatened by students. I was very threatened by how good they were. I was very threatened by how much they didn't want to learn from me and how much they would rather learn from someone who looked like a teacher. Fair-skinned, perfect English, lean, long hair, etc., etc. So I think for me, writing became a way of making myself equal to the student. So it started for all the wrong reasons. But then somewhere in between, I started liking what writing was doing to me and my body in the classroom. I learned to let go. It stopped being about revenge. It stopped being about I can also write and other things like that. And then I've started becoming really obsessed with things like, today I will just sit and write one perfect sentence. And when that started happening, I realized that I was falling in love with the process, with the craft, and that made me a better teacher in the classroom somewhere. There would be days when I would have no enthu to teach, so I would just go and do the bare minimum. But there would be some girl who would sit in the last bench and feel very enlightened by some stupid thing I would say. And she would come out of the class and say, my God, that just blew my mind. That was incredible. And I would be thinking, girl, I just gave you 1% of my energy today and you think that changed your world. The one thing it did me feel was very guilty. So I thought 1% is enough for this girl to come and tell me I changed her world. Now what can happen if I give it 100%? And I realized that 100% is coming from writing itself. It's an energy thing for me. Every time I write, I go back to the classroom fully armed. It used to be the case when I felt attacked in the classroom, when qualifications were questioned and things like that. So every time I wrote, it felt like I was earning my credibility to be in the classroom, that this is my qualification. I'm writing, so you shut up and learn from me. I think it was Claudia Rankine who makes this very interesting distinction for black women in America, where playgrounds have become battlefields for black women because they have to constantly prove that they're qualified to play tennis or be a film star or be a rock star, etc. So in that sense, for a long time, the classroom was a battlefield for me because I had to protect myself and also be naked and everything. But writing made it a playground. It was no longer a battlefield because I started having fun. And then I think students respond to it when teachers have fun in the classroom. They have fun if the teacher is having fun. If they are very bored and looking very drained and pissed off, the student will automatically look drained and pissed off. I was reading Gogu Shamala's short stories at this point, and something she said about doing your craft so well that people are just riveted and they just sit and watch you mesmerized. She says this about the Bhagavatam performers. When they're performing for upper caste landlords, the boys sitting in the front keep teasing the young girls. And one of the young girls goes and asks the senior most performer, these boys keep irritating me and teasing me. I want to take action, I want to do something. And she says, you mesmerize them with your performance. Then let's see. So she starts doing that. That short story came into a lot of question after Me Too, because then lots of woke people were like, oh, you want us to mesmerize our abusers, blah, blah, blah. But they just lost the point, because it did equip me, a Dalit person in the classroom, to want to mesmerize people who are attacking me or who I thought were attacking me. I'm not saying that these attacks were like full frontal, visible, we will kill you. No, it's never like that. But it's always in some small ways that only I can see, or I think that I'm seeing it. So writing then transformed into a shield, and today it's like a ball that I can play with. So it gave me a new version of myself that I can like. Earlier, I didn't like the versions that I had. I had to constantly adjust it. I had to constantly look for yellow lights to see myself, because white lights made me look ugly. So writing was like the yellow light. It made me see myself in like one nice, charming way, and I could be anybody in this world. The third thing that energized this for me was the literal demonstration of what young girls learning to write in the classroom was doing to them. I have students who come in the first year terrified of writing, terrified of English. They come from small towns or big towns, or they just feel very lost in the classroom because they say, I can't compete with them. They write so well and they read so well. How do I start this? And then I tell them my journey and how I started off. It may not always energize them, but to see how they were in the first year and then to see them graduate when they leave the classroom, it's like a huge jump. And they won't have the patience to look back when they are graduating to see how much they've had to deal with to come this far. But I always can. I'm always a spectator in the classroom. And that spectating has also made me a participant in my own writing. So I think that's what writing does for me.
विकास, जैसे अभिषेक ने एक कथारसिस या एक ऐसे रिलीज की बात करी है अपने एक्सपीरियंस के बारे में लिखने की, विजेता ने अपने क्लासरूम में क्या बदला है लिखने से, आपके लिए क्या बदला है जब से आपने लिखना शुरू किया है? तो आपका किस तरह से वर्ल्ड व्यू या दुनिया को देखने का नज़रिया या आपके लाइफ में किस तरह चीज़ें बदली हैं?
काफ़ी चीज़ें बदली हैं कि जैसे कि बात कर रहे हैं कि जब मैंने पहले लिखना शुरू किया था तो मैं हर चीज़ को एक तरह से देखता था, तो जैसे हाँ कि ये ठीक है, चल रहा है, ये सही है, ये चल रहा है तो कोई बात नहीं, मुझे क्या करना है इससे। तो वो एक तरह से नज़र थी मेरी कि हाँ हर चीज़ को बस हाँ ठीक है चल रहा है, अपने को क्या करना है। तो जब लिखना शुरू किया, उस चीज़ को समझना शुरू किया, जैसे जेंडर था, हिंसा थी और एक तरह से यौनिकता की बात थी, तो जब उसको लिखना शुरू किया तो अब पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू जो मेरा था वो बदला है। अब मैं किसी चीज़ को देख रहा हूँ तो एक जैसे एक नज़रिया होता है देखने का, हाँ आप एक नज़र से देख लो, बस अपना काम करो, चलते हो। अब वो मेरा बदला है थोड़ा सा कि मैं किसी चीज़ को थोड़ा सा अब उसमें गहराई से देख रहा हूँ किसी चीज़ को कि कहाँ है वो चीज़, कैसे हो रही है। और अब कहते हैं कि मतलब किसी चीज़ में इंटरेस्ट एक जगता है आपका किसी चीज़ में, वो अब इंटरेस्ट भी जगने लगा है कि मतलब मैं किसी के बारे में, अपने शहर के बारे में देखता हूँ तो शहर में बहुत कुछ चीज़ें होती हैं कि किसी चीज़ पर आवाज़ उठाना की बात है कि शहर में क्या चल रहा है, और कोई किसी लड़की कोई बात कर रहा है तो किस तरह से प्रेजेंट करना है। तो वो जो एक आवाज़ अंदर से आती है कि आप इसके बारे में बोल सकते हो या फिर किसी चीज़ को दिखाना है, तो वो एक तरह से जो एनर्जी होती है वो मुझ में लिखने से मतलब एक बिल्ड हुई है। और मैं खुद भी देखता हूँ, तो जैसे कि फिल्म की बात भी है, तो हम लोग फिल्म में भी काम करते हैं कि फिल्म्स हैं, ऑडियोज़ हैं, पॉडकास्ट भी काम करते हैं। तो जब लेखन जो है वो सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट है कि आप तरह से आपका पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू क्या है, कि आप किसी चीज़ को पढ़ रहे हैं तो या देख रहे हैं तो एक तरह से आपके अंदर वो फील आने लगता है कि मेरा एस्पिरेशन क्या है, मैं क्या देखना चाहता हूँ आगे, किसको मैं देख रहा हूँ। तो वो जो बिल्ड हो रहा है वो लेखन से, या वो जो 2 सालों की 3 सालों की थर्ड आई के साथ में रही है मेरी प्रोसेस, वो बिल्ड हुआ है। और जो मैं अभी बोल भी पा रहा हूँ, अच्छा जैसे कि अभी बड़े स्टेज पे हैं तो वो भी जब एक कहते हैं कि करेज आता है आपके अंदर कि किसी को लिखने से कि आपने कुछ फील किया है, एक्सपीरियंस किए हैं किसी चीज़ का, तो बेसिकली यही।
Thinking of this panel, and we were wanting to talk about feminist cities and how to write them, I was feeling very uncertain because I was also thinking whether I've thought about this as a what if there could be a to-do list for how to write about feminist cities. And I think there was also a little anxiety कि जो लोग आएंगे इस सेशन में वो शायद नोट्स लेना चाहेंगे कि हाँ ना हम लिखना चाहते हैं, we will this is the way we need to write about feminist cities. So I want to ask all three of you, and any of you can start by responding कि जब आप एक feminist vision of a city की बात करते हैं, when you talk about a vision for a feminist city, or as a writer, what is it for you? एक नारीवादी शहर या नगर या जगह आपके लिए क्या है, और उसको आप अपने लेखन में कैसे उतारते हैं? How do you bring it into your writing?
For me, the starting point is always to look at the gaze, because once you're aware of the gaze, I think, I used to perform poems earlier about how disability has shaped my feminism. Because that gaze, when you walk anywhere and people stare at you, and it's not a comfortable stare, it doesn't make you feel that you belong to the streets. And I think many women face that every day all across the country. And if you become aware of that gaze, there is a constant societal gaze. A woman is working in the kitchen and the husband comes and tells her whether the food has some kind of demerit or something is wrong is happening in the kitchen, or instructs her about the help or something like that. And we see that in our households every day. And that gaze becomes much more clearer, or be it very small incident. It's not even about discrimination. It's just about how the world looks at you and it you begin to question the normative in every form. And when you begin to question the normative in every form, you become a feminist. Because being a feminist is also challenging the normative patriarchal structure of the society. And you observe patriarchy only when you observe everything. So for me, it has been an evolution of sorts. It started with looking at just gender in terms of men and women, but it became about queerness, it became about sexuality, it became about disability. And because everything, all of this is part of a spectrum, it's not that these are very different things. Because as soon as you realize there is a one expectation of the society, one norm decided, then you realize any diversion from this norm, however little, will be gazed at, will be questioned, will be discouraged. And that's when you start writing. When you start writing, you don't even need to subconsciously think, this comes to you. When you start questioning the normative, this will come to you. But what happens to, and doesn't only come from what you go through, it comes from what the rules laid by that normative society. And that's, for me, that becomes the starting point of the entire questioning. Questioning the normative, I think, is very important.
I'm not sure how to. I'm not sure if it's possible, because the experiences of the city, for it to be feminist, for us to shape feminist experiences for other people living in the city, I don't see it happening very easily. I'll give you one example. When Me Too happened in 2018, there was in Bangalore All India Bangalore Domestic Workers Union meeting happening. And their only point was, we have been saying Me Too for much longer than anybody else has. Is it because we didn't say it in English that it wasn't Me Too? And there was a conductor here who has had terrible experiences in the bus, and she had such specific experiences of working in the city, in a city bus, that nobody really had an answer for a problem that she was raising. Her problem was, she's in a crowded bus and she is a conductor, which means that her hands are full. Her occupation means that both her hands are occupied all the time. One for collecting money and the other to sort of give the ticket stub. And she says she has no more hands left to protect herself. And this is a bus that's largely crowded with people who sometimes grope her, and then she doesn't know who has done it. And she has no way of protecting herself, she said. And there was just thuds of silence in the room at that point, because nobody knew how to help her. And this is just happening in one small part of Bangalore. And I'm not really sure that there is a straight answer to a problem like this. And this is just one example I'm thinking of. So I think until we solve some part of that problem for every other person living in the city who is dealing with such specific problems, it can't be a feminist city. And I'm not sure how to ensure that happens. So I think quite simply, it can become a feminist city simply by trying, but I'm still very skeptical about what it will do.
जैसे कि नारीवादी का बात था कि सिटीज़ में किस तरह से हैं, तो डायरेक्ट अपन किसी को जैसे लिखते हैं तो सीधा कि हाँ ये लड़की को ये नहीं मिल रहा है या महिलाओं को ये नहीं मिल रहा है, वो बात हो गई कि सीधी आप उसी के बारे में बता रहे हैं कि हाँ ये चीज़ है, ये गलत हो रहा है, ये उस नज़र से है। लेकिन हम जो दूसरा फैक्ट है कि जैसे मैन की लड़कों की बात है, पुरुषों की बात है, वो हम कहीं ना कहीं उस नारीवादी के चक्कर में पीछे भूल जाते हैं कि वो पीछे छूट गए और नारीवादी नारीवादी करते हम आगे आ गए हैं उसके बारे में। तो जब इस चीज़ को जब मैं लिखता हूँ तो थोड़ा सा इसको अवॉइड करने की कोशिश करता हूँ। तो मैंने एक जैसे हॉस्टल की बात थी, तो हाँ जैसे जोधपुर शहर है एक तरह से, तो उसमें जो समाज होता है, मेरा एक खत्री समाज है, जैसे कि और भी हैं, पुष्करना होते हैं, जैसे राजपूत हैं, अलग अलग समाज होते हैं। तो उनका क्या होता है कि जो हायर एजुकेशन लेना चाहते हैं, जो छोटे शहर से होते हैं, जो जिनके पास इतना कहते हैं कि वो एबल नहीं है कि हायर एजुकेशन के लिए, तो उनको ये समाज क्या करता है कि उनके लिए एक हॉस्टल खोलता है अपने लिए। तो वो हॉस्टल जितने भी मैंने उस 2 सालों में 3 सालों में उस जोधपुर में देखा, उस शहर में देखा, तो सारे हॉस्टल लड़कों के लिए थी। अब लड़कियां कहीं जा रही है तो वो कहीं पर हॉस्टल प्राइवेट हॉस्टल ढूंढ रही है, कहीं पर प्राइवेट रूम ढूंढ रही है कि मुझे कहीं मिल सकता है। तो अब उनको स्ट्रगल करना पड़ रहा है कि, तो वो बात कि एक छोटा सा सवाल था मेरा लास्ट में कि समाज के सारे हॉस्टल लड़कों के लिए क्यों हैं, लड़कियों के लिए क्यों नहीं है। तो कहीं हम जब लिखते हैं एक बात की कि सबके लिए शहर बड़ा है, खुला है और सबके लिए ओपन है, लेकिन जब हम उसको एक गहरी नज़र से देखते हैं, उस चीज़ को देख रहे हैं, तो उसमें लगता है कि हाँ कहीं ना कहीं जो पावर है किसी के पास, जो वो पावर वो चाहती है कि वही रहे, उससे टूटे नहीं, उसके हाथ से निकले नहीं, जो रूल्स है वो रूल्स टूटे नहीं। जब हमने बात की थी कि लिव इन रिलेशनशिप के बीच में बात कर रहे थे कि लिव इन रिलेशनशिप की बात करते हैं, तो काफ़ी डिस्कशन हुआ कि अगर एक लड़का है और लड़का किसी लड़की के साथ भाग जाता है, या लड़का बोलते भाग जाना मतलब लव मैरिज कर लेता है, तो ठीक है, लड़की के लिए कोई नहीं, लड़के वाले एक्सेप्ट कर लेंगे, उसके घर वाले वगैरह। लेकिन अगर लड़की ढूंढती है तो इज्जत का सवाल किसका है? इज्जत तो वो लड़की की जा रही है, लड़के के लिए कुछ नहीं है। तो जब हम लिखते हैं तो खाली पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू एक महिला का या लड़की का नहीं रख के हम एक वो जो दूसरा फैक्ट है उसको बाहर लाने की कोशिश करते कि आप उस तरह से ना सोचें। एक आपने दूसरा पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू आपने पीछे छोड़ दिया है, जो आप उसके ऊपर ध्यान नहीं दे रहे हो। तो हम जब नारीवादी की बात करते हैं तो नारीवादी ये नहीं कि हम लोग खाली लड़की को महिलाओं को आगे लाना चाहते हैं, वो सशक्त बने, वो रह रहे हैं, पर कहीं ना कहीं आपको दूसरी भी बात करनी पड़ेगी। अगर नारी की बात करें तो पुरुष भी साथ में चलेगा, दोनों की बात करोगे तब वो आपकी नारीवादी है। एक नारी को लेके नारीवादी नहीं हो सकता।
आई थिंक एक जो आप तीनों की बातों से आगे आया है, एंड समथिंग दैट हैज स्टक विथ मी इज दैट I mean, one is the experiential part of it and a very deeply personal part of it. And something जो विकास ने और विजेता दोनों ने कहा कि writing about feminist cities is also a work in progress in some ways. I mean, it's like when we say, you know, who are feminist cities for, or, you know, who is the city for? And when we had put out this panel, in fact, someone had written to me saying, you know, what exactly is a feminist city in my DMs. And I tried to put all the right words, you know, saying, you know, access and this and that and the other. And then there are many things which tick 2 of those. There are many things, many places that tick 3 of those. And I think it's when I started thinking about the fact that when we even think of writing, it's difficult to write about everything. But the little that we write about, if this is something we could keep in mind, is, you know, the experiential, personal and the work in progress nature of it, कि शहर धीरे धीरे बनाने से बनेगा. So with that, I'd like to close and maybe take a couple of questions from our audience here.
My question is to Vijeta, and I've become a huge fan of your work. And I was just curious from the standpoint of a Dalit Bahujan student, because more often than not, it's kind of like when we have teachers like you, we would probably not have another Darshan Solanki, we would probably not have another Rohit and all of that. So what has been your experience when you have had students who could feel safe because they also have a DBA teacher, vis-a-vis most of the teachers who are Savarna who could be intimidating and problematic?
And this is something I've been thinking about, and quite honestly, I'm dreading the day I wake up to the news that there is my student who I teach, who I know to be Dalit Bahujan, has killed themselves. It's possible. It's possible even with a Savarna teacher in the classroom. It's possible even with a Dalit teacher in the classroom. Simply because there is nothing I can do to there's nothing more I can do to ensure that this doesn't happen. Out of the humanness of how much ever I'm able to do, I can do. But beyond that, it scares me. It scares me that I can't prevent that. And I know that we all don't want to live in a world where this keeps happening. But you know, I haven't been able to figure out what I'm going to do if this happens. It's my single most worry at any given point as a teacher, and it's my worry every day because it's possible for it to happen anytime, and I can't. And the fact that my own powerlessness in this space is made available to me in this form makes me feel much smaller. And I'm not claiming that having a Dalit teacher in the classroom will prevent news like that or events like that, because I'm not sure it's enough. I'm not sure if having Dalit teachers or Dalit students in the classroom is definitely, it sort of gives a new structure to the sense of how teaching is, what the experience of the classroom can be. But I'm not sure this is enough for me to prevent that. My being Dalit is not enough. The students being happy or sad for beyond measure. I mean, there's nothing that I can do to control it, and that scares me a lot. But I've often noticed that more than having teachers in the classroom, what works for students is seeing people like themselves. As a student, if you have someone in the classroom who talks like you or looks like you or is just as scared as you are, then no matter what happens in the classroom, you have some sense of friendship somewhere. And this friendship I've seen coming from across caste and across gender. And it's always nice to see. But I must admit that is my number one nightmare at the moment.
I think anyone else?
I realize that all the three speakers looked at inclusivity. I think being inclusive itself is being feminist. I think Vikas mentioned it. But, you know, when you say city itself, when you look at growth of cities from either being this, I mean, I don't know if you, I mean, I have a problem with the term feminist cities. Because when you look at city itself, city is, while of course it affords anonymity, it affords aspirational fulfillment, it affords lots of things, but it also excludes. It excludes widely. The nature of city is to exclude. So I don't know how you can write cities into feminism, seriously.
I think a feminist city is not a real city, it's an ideal. And when I talk about thinking about normative behavior, I'm saying when you write a feminist city, when you write about a feminist city, when you reimagine your spaces around you like a feminist city, how do you approach it? And you approach it with inclusivity, of course. You think about women, you think about caste, you think about minorities, you think about gender, you think about everything. Of course, and it's not for tokenism and not inclusive. What I have a problem with the term inclusivity, because that is a term which is tokenistic and is often used tokenistically. But why isn't, if it in our imaginariums, the idea of a feminist city? And you know what Vikas said was very interesting, that men have to be included in this discourse because they are the perpetrators of some sorts, because the men decide not to open a women's hostel. And so if you reimagine a feminist city, what role do men play in it is a very big question. And but you won't go to the perpetrators to ask them so what do you think about turning the tables? You will say let's think about who is the marginalized, who is the person who is getting it all the time, getting on the wrong side of the deal. And you think of them while you reimagine a city. So it's always like Vijeta said, it's a continuum. I think there's no idea, but the idea of course, the city is very masculine in that sense. It's constantly expanding. It's very brute. But if we can't even imagine feminist cities, then how will we? My question is, how will we work? See, I constantly go from this crisis of why to even think about a city which is accessible when even basic tokenism is not followed. But for me, I think there's no other answer than my writing, especially, makes me more hopeful about things. That if I can imagine, like I come from a very small town where I had no exposure to any of this. From Darbhanga to sitting here in Bangalore, I can say about these things. I could have been, I'm from a oppressor caste, heteronormative, very, very casteist society. I could have easily become that. But I'm not right now. And maybe something changed. Maybe disability changed it, maybe education changed it, I don't know what changed. But if that doesn't empower me to think of an alternative, then what will? Then we are all left panicking and hopeless.
So I just wanted to quickly address that. I don't know why it didn't occur to say this before. I mean, I should have thought of this before. The very idea of writing a feminist city is Ambedkarite, in the sense that he always wanted people to leave villages and get to the city. It was also very anti-Gandhian for him to say it, because Gandhi thought that India was in the villages, and Ambedkar thought, no, it's in the city, because you leave that and you come here. In saying that in itself, Ambedkar not only was saying a very anti-caste thing, he was also saying a very feminist thing. I live in one of the most Brahmin areas of Bangalore, Baswangudi. I'm probably one among the 1% of Dalits that live there. There aren't many Dalits that live in Baswangudi. I'm flanked by Brahmin neighbors, 360 degrees. And when we first built this house and came in, the woman next door would steal our milk packets, because her son, she was a muddy, which means that her son had some very strict rules for her about when she could have milk, when she could have coffee and all of that. So she would steal our milk packets. And my father was very upset, and he kept running after her, calling her Kalli, Kalli, Kalli every morning, but nothing happened. That nothing was enough to embarrass her enough to stop stealing our milk packets. My brother was washing some two-wheeler the next morning, and she saw that he wasn't wearing a shirt. She saw that he didn't have a sacred thread. And next day, automatically, our milk packets were our milk packets. She stopped stealing it. What I see in this discourse is that her idea of the city changed in this instant. At this point, she was excluded, not me or my family, because suddenly one thing that she could do very easily without thinking, which is to steal milk packets. Her caste is now keeping her away from a cup of coffee. Stolen. But she can't steal our milk anymore because she's thinking, okay, I can't drink an untouchable's milk or whatever. And that has now prevented her from stealing. And my father felt very like, okay, if we are Dalits and that means that we can have milk peacefully, fine, good. And I thought this is such a great moment to think of. For me, that's a stunning example of what it's like to live in a city like Bangalore. That you see caste everywhere, but I'm also constantly wondering who is the one excluded here. I'm probably, our family is probably one among the lucky ones who can say this. My experience of caste is not necessarily every other Dalit person's experience of caste in the city. But this is one example, and I still think it's a very important example because it just goes on to show that he didn't have to do much at all to be able to scare people into believing that he has arrived in Baswangudi. I still feel very ashamed to go and tell people I come from Baswangudi. But I'm able to do that because my parents were like, why do they think only they can live there? I also want a house. I also want to send my students, my children to this school only where Brahmins' children are sent. And that has punctured some anti-casteness into Baswangudi. I'm not saying we are very actively doing horata in Baswangudi and saying eat beef everyone, blah, blah. No, we're not doing that. But just by having a house there that is ours, something is being rewritten for Baswangudi. And I'm glad that I get to participate in this.
Sorry, we are out of time, so we'll wrap up. Abhishek, Vijeta, Vikas, and Soni, thanks for being here.